Part 3. Practical. Chapter 8. The Training of the Mind. The grimoires of magic give instructions for the preparation of the magical instruments to be used by the magus in his work. The wand, the sword, the pen for drawing pentacles, and all the rest of them. But these grimoires themselves are the work of the uninitiated, with half-understood and misrepresented secrets stolen from the mysteries. This materialistic concept has persisted even among students of the subject who ought to know better. It's not in the elaborate processes used in the preparation of a material article that the virtue lies, but in the condition produced in the etheric counterpart of that article by the handling and thought concentration that it undergoes in the course of the operation. It's magnetized, firstly by the personal magnetism of the operator, secondly an aura of the thought form is built up around it, and thirdly, by the right use of the imagination and the will, it's made the physical vehicle of an invisible cosmic force, contacted by the operator and concentrated by him. It'll be seen from the foregoing considerations that the essence of all practical operations is mental. It follows, therefore, that in the powers of the mind we find the key to the whole process. And although everybody has a mind, they have not by any manner of means all got the conscious use of these powers, though there are more people who have the subconscious and involuntary use of them than is generally credited. A large part of the training of an initiate must therefore consist in the development of these latent aspects of the mind. For the purposes of our study, we may consider the mind under 3 heads, as is usually done in psychology: feeling, will, and reason. But instead of considering them as the psychologists do, as separate units, we shall consider them as the Kabbalists do, as successive emanations resulting in equilibrium. We should thus see feeling and reason in polarity, and the kinetic will as resulting from their union. But this is not enough. According to Kabbalistic principle, a trinity thus formed must be resumed in a 4th principle upon another plane before it can become functional. If the plane under consideration is a lower plane, they'll be resumed in a physical body which gives them expression on the plane of matter through instinct. But if the plane under consideration is a higher plane, they'll be resumed in that little understood faculty, the imagination. It's from this synthesis upon a higher plane, and from this alone, that occult power issues forth. We have to consider, therefore, the process by means of which the would-be adept is enabled first to dissect out of these separate factors from the general coordination of his mind, purify and concentrate them, and re-synthesize them upon a higher arc. This, of course, is the real process of alchemy, the great work. Dirt has been well defined as misplaced matter. Purification consists in returning it to its proper place, whatever has become misplaced, thus mingling with and thereby adulterating that which is different from itself. Thus, if emotion intrudes into any intellectual process, it contaminates it and falsifies its results. For intellectual processes should be carried on in terms of reason alone, in order that the ultimate issue may be truth. It follows that as a preliminary to all mental processes, we must acquire such control of the emotions that they shall not function involuntarily. Such control is not obtained by the comparatively simple expedient of repression, but by the far more difficult process of sublimation, so that the force generated by an external stimulus, instead of producing an immediate reaction of emotion, which might take place where it was not wanted, is directed to a more remote reaction and discharges harmlessly upon another plane. Thus, an immediate reaction of resentment is transmuted into compassion and has its issue in charity. This is the first and hardest lesson that the seeker of the way has to learn. But once mastered, the powers thus acquired can be applied to the overcoming of other difficulties, for the momentum of the path is cumulative. The next task to which the neophyte has to apply himself is training of his will. It may be thought that for some people this is a hopeless task, for the naturally weak-willed. The will, however, is not a separate organ of the mind which may function adequately or inadequately. The will does not secrete force as the liver secretes bile. The will is simply the power to concentrate the available energies. It does not matter how strong-willed a man may be, he cannot drive body or mind beyond a certain point. Nor does it matter how strong-muscled a man may be. He will not exert anything approaching his full power unless he concentrates his will. The strong will is really the single-pointed will, as we see all too clearly in the drunkard who's too weak-willed to stick at any work, but shows an amazing tenacity in obtaining alcohol. The secret of a strong will, therefore, is to concentrate it upon a single object. This can only be achieved by eliminating all competing objects which divide the attention of the will and so fritter away its energies. This is one reason that sacrifice is said to be the first step in the mysteries, for it's only by sacrificing ruthlessly all irrelevant interests that the single-pointed and potent will is obtained. It may be argued that a person thus concentrated would be unbalanced. This is a just argument, and the initiate overcomes it by employing the principle of rhythm. He says that although the bow must be tight strung to give flight to the arrow, the bow that is always strung loses its resilience. So he's careful to unstring his bow when it's not in use. Nevertheless, the object of a bow is to be bent, and therefore he never casts away the cord. In the earlier days of his training, an initiate goes through an exceedingly strict discipline, and every departure from the law of the path meets with immediate and severe punishment. There is but one way of safety for him, and that's the way as narrow as the blade of a sword and as straight as its edge. No human hand metes out his discipline to him. His teacher, the adept under whom he works as an apprentice, does all in his power by example and advice to save him from error. But he cannot constrain him, any more than he can avert the consequences of a broken cosmic law. Action and reaction are equal and opposite upon the path as elsewhere, and the neophyte has to receive the reaction of his forces for every thought he sets in motion. By these forces he's uplifted or bruised, as the case may be. After this section of the path has been passed, the way opens out, and the initiate may safely take up again those things which he laid upon the altar of sacrifice which stands before the gate. The more richly endowed he is, the more he has to bring to his work. But after the discipline of the straight and narrow way, he will never again become attached to external things as he was before. He will always be their master, able to use them without becoming obsessed by them, so that, being free from the bondage of these things, he can use and enjoy them to the enriching of consciousness. But the preliminary discipline, the cautery of freedom, is essential. The trained initiate comes to his work with the ability to clear the decks for action at the word of command, and go through and over everything without looking to the right hand or to the left until he comes to his goal. After he has achieved, but not before, he takes an inventory of the breakages and binds up his wounds, and it's frequently found that the speed of his rush has carried him through comparatively scatheless. In actual life, it'll be found that there are very few people or organizations of people who will stand up to the bull push of the disciplined will, and there's nothing magical about its triumph. It's only when the knowledge of the cosmogony of the subtler planes is employed that the work of the will becomes occult. It's only when it's used to direct cosmic forces that it becomes the magician's rod. In considering these matters, it must never be forgotten that such forces must always be directed in strict obedience to cosmic law, or the reaction will return full circle and crush the magician. It's only at the growing point of evolution that we find free-moving forces, not as yet stereotyped into form, which can be thus directed by the human will, and therefore it's only in the service of the hierarchy by whose means God guideth Arcturus with his sons that we find the white magician employed. The neophyte following the path uses the powers of his dedicated and disciplined will upon himself, not upon external nature. We now come to the consideration of the training of the intellect itself. This is the oft-debated question among those who seek the inner light, for many are of the purely mystical temperament, whose path is that of bhakti yoga, the discipline of love. These are unsuitable for the occult path, whereon intellectual qualifications are essential. So many come to that path with no equipment save ideals and aspirations, and complain bitterly of the conditions exacted, conditions with which they are temperamentally unable to comply. Is not their devotion, they ask, enough to take them to God? It's indeed enough if they're content with the path of devotion, but it's not enough upon the occult path, which is the path of the trained and enlightened intellect. Intellectual capacity is essential upon the occult path, and where it's not forthcoming, it's useless to attempt that path, just as it would be useless to attempt a university career. The mind of the initiate needs to be well trained in the discipline of logic and philosophy. If he lacks either of these, he will assuredly fall into the most serious errors, for he will mistake the appearance for the reality. Viewed metaphysically, all the planes of manifestation are different types of existence, and the 7 bodies of man, not excepting the physical, are different modes of consciousness and different types of organization of force. Unless we know exactly what consciousness is and how apprehension takes place, we'll be unable to translate our consciousness from one mode to another. This process may be likened to that of transposing from one key to another in music. The amateur who can vamp a little may not necessarily be able to transpose. The great mistake to which the untrained psychic is liable is that of confusing the planes and thinking in terms of one plane when functioning in another. This is how we get such anthropomorphic concepts of God and the unseen universe. It's against this error that the mental discipline of the initiate is designed to guard. However true our metaphysical concepts may be, however clearly we recognize the significance of the change of mode of consciousness between the planes, unless we have perfect control of our thoughts, we shall not be able to prevent one kind of consciousness from flowing over the province of another and causing confusion. We all know from bitter experience how difficult it is to keep our thoughts from wandering in church or in class. Supposing we're functioning out of the body upon the astral plane and our thoughts wandered, we would immediately change our position in space, metaphorically speaking. If we were thinking of Egyptian magic and our thoughts wandered to Atlantean magic, we should find that we had changed both our continent and our century. Unless we can be sure of holding a thought steadily in consciousness without mind wandering for a considerable period, it's useless for us to attempt any major operation in practical occultism. The neophyte, therefore, pursues a graded course of mental exercises designed to enable him to attain a high degree of concentration. No one is capable of the deepest occult meditation who cannot meditate in a railway station while waiting for his train. This involves 2 things: the power to go so deeply into meditation as to be completely withdrawn from the physical environment, and the power to keep count of time and return at will. Without the latter, the former is a dangerous and disorganizing accomplishment and is the cause of much incoordination among occultists. Consciousness is raised to a given plane by inhibiting the thoughts of the modes of consciousness of all the planes below it. This, of course, requires perfect concentration. When the train of association of ideas between the different planes is completely severed, just as it is when an actor suddenly forgets his part and stands speechless upon the stage, consciousness is free to function outside the body upon the plane of its choice. But immediately we're confronted by another problem. Consciousness, having once been set free, how is it supposed to be recaptured? We can no more command its return by will when a complete dissociation has taken place. We can no more command its return by will when a complete dissociation has taken place than the actor can command his tongue to proceed with its task. Another device has to be employed, and that's the setting of the subconscious alarm clock we call the time sense. This, and this alone, can call us back to the body, just as it can wake us up from sleep in the morning. Anyone who goes out onto the inner planes without setting this time sense is taking an undue risk, and its results we do not infrequently see in the sudden deterioration or change of caliber that sometimes overtakes the student of esoteric subjects, whether mystic or occultist. He's dissociated his personality for the purpose of going out of his body to the inner planes, and he's not been able to fully resynthesize it. He is, therefore, still living partly on the inner planes and is not fully conscious of his physical environment nor able to employ its modes of thought. For him, therefore, a thought is a thing and a wish its own fulfillment. Finally, we come to the consideration of the fourth element in our mind training, the work of the imagination, the image-making faculty of the mind. In other words, that which makes the astral matrices. If the work of the three previous aspects has been rightly performed, we shall have little difficulty in synthesizing them into the fourth. The process itself presents no problems provided the preliminary work has been properly carried out. Our only care need be to build these thought forms according to cosmic law, for if we depart from this law in our operations, they'll either be dangerous or useless. It's for this reason that the initiate must have a thorough knowledge of esoteric cosmology, for it's according to the laws of the cosmos that he has to build, for he himself, when attempting this work, has joined the ranks of solar archons, divas, or building spirits, and the line between the Beni Elohim and the fallen angels is narrow. It will thus be seen that the equipment of the adept is pretty extensive, and that none but those who start with a certain degree of natural capacity are inured to discipline, and are willing to work, and work hard and continuously, abandoning all else save the labor necessary for their minimal support to stand any chance whatsoever of making the grade. It was said to me by a certain adept under whom at one time I had the privilege of working, that unless men work at occultism as they work for the prizes of their professions, they will not achieve. There's one book which, above all others, I would recommend every aspirant after initiation to read, and that is the old-fashioned and despised volume of Victorian Idealism, Self-Help by Samuel Smiles. He will see therein how the great pioneers of industry toiled to achieve. He will read of Palissy, the great potter, burning the furniture of his house to keep his furnace going and reducing himself to the most miserable poverty in pursuit of the lost secrets of the glaze. He will also read that few of these men were rewarded in their lifetime, but died poor and neglected. Their reward was in the knowledge of work well done and secrets wrested from nature to enrich mankind. Like Prometheus, They brought down fire from heaven, and vultures gnawed their vitals for reward. Having pondered these things well, let the student then set out on the path that leads to adepthood. Chapter 14. The Training of the Body. The key to practical occultism is in the mind, but no occult operation can be reckoned to be completed unless it's brought through the plane of matter, even if the bringing through consists only of a recollection in brain consciousness. Otherwise, any experiment must be reckoned as abortive. We must therefore consider the physical conditions that help or hinder our experiments. The practice of the ancients, based on traditional experience, is usually a reliable guide in these matters, provided we can find it unadulterated by superstition. The practice of modern physics is all too often based on hypersensitive caprice, guided by spurious information. The link between matter and mind is to be found in the etheric subplanes of existence. Be it noted that the occultist does not class the ether and its subdivisions as a separate plane, but as among the subplanes of the physical plane, thus clearly indicating that no hard and fast line can be drawn between matter in its denser states and matter in its etheric states. The difference is one of degree, not of kind. The three denser subplanes of the ether are associated respectively with heat, light, and electricity, and the fourth of which the modern scientist knows nothing is the akasha, or astral light of the ancients, the point of contact of mind with matter and the raw material of magic. The akasha is capable of being molded by the emotional forces of the astral plane, and in its turn is capable of influencing the other etheric subplanes, but it cannot influence dense matter. The ethers, however, in their kinetic states as heat, light, and electricity, can influence dense matter, and so, if we know how to use it, we have a line of communication between mind and matter via the akasha or astral light, and it is this Jacob's ladder that is used by initiates in their work. Every manifested form has a certain modicum of akasha built into its substance, some more, some less. About every form, whether it's a diatom or a planet, there is an electric field of magnetic stresses. It's this electromagnetic field, plus the modicum of astral light, which is the vehicle of the life forces and transmitter of the messages of mind. Consequently, when the occultist performs operations on the physical plane, it's this etheric body he's working with, and not dense matter. If he uses material objects or substances at all, it's solely on account of the etheric element in their composition. For instance, crystals and pure metals have the largest proportions of etheric substance of anything in an inanimate nature. Alloys or any composite substance are practically useless from the occult point of view because their etheric double does not form a cohesive whole, but is of two types of vibration. It's these substances, therefore, highly refractive crystals and pure unalloyed metals, that were used by the ancients for the construction of charms and amulets. That their faith in them was not rooted in pure superstition is proved by the fact that the electrician also finds that he requires pure, unalloyed metals in his batteries and circuits, and that the crystal is used as detector in wireless telegraphy because it's susceptible to the vibrations of the ether, thus confirming the occultist, who says that the crystal is the most magical of physical substances because it's the most etheric. The occultist aims at making of his physical body a vehicle that shall impede him as little as possible in his psychic activities. That is to say, it must be as refined as possible, using the word in the metallurgist sense, not the social sense. Secondly, it must be of a strength and toughness to be able to endure the exceptional forces he requires it to transmit. The adept, therefore, is not an etherealized person, like the conventional saint in a stained glass window. A trained occultist is, by virtue of his training, capable of great physical endurance and exceedingly tenacious of life, as is witnessed by the extraordinary happenings in connection with the murder of the infamous Rasputin, who resisted cyanide of potassium and bullets through the heart and brain, and had finally to be literally hacked to pieces before life was extinct. The occultist does not regard the brain as the vehicle of mind, but rather as the organ of motor coordination and cessation, a very different matter. For him, the vehicles of mind are the 7 chakras, as they are called in the East, or in other words, the endocrines. A little thought on this point will reveal its implications. The ductless glands pour their secretions into the bloodstream, and the blood is literally the essence of man. Alter the chemical composition of blood, and you alter consciousness, as witness the phenomena of both anesthesia and insanity. Many types of the latter clearing up completely when septic foci, such as tonsils and teeth, are eradicated, and other types responding to the addition of the products of certain of the ductless glands to the bloodstream, in which previously the due proportion was lacking. The occultist, therefore, for the delicate processes of specialized consciousness in which he indulges, must have an absolutely pure bloodstream that will not in any way distort or falsify consciousness. It's the neglect of this elementary precaution which is at the root of much psychic trouble, and one of the most frequent and common causes of so-called obsession is constipation. The bloodstream loaded with impurities reabsorbed from the intestines affects consciousness, and consciousness thus debased contacts its corresponding astral aspect, and the psychic faculties do the rest, revealing to the sufferer the nature of that which he has been brought into touch. Calomel is the simple and efficient exorcist in such cases, and with the clearance of the degraded substances from the body, the degraded contacts will be broken. Any abnormal or diseased condition of the generative organs also renders practical occult work risky or impossible, and any marked disproportion of deformity of the bony framework of the body is also a serious disadvantage. Accidental injuries or deformity due to disease, however, do not appear to be any detriment, and a man who's lost a limb would still be able to work a ritual, whereas another with a comparatively slight congenital deformity would not. It's also noteworthy that the more important parts in some rituals are best done by tall and powerfully built men. It's exceedingly undesirable to attempt any practical occultism when exhausted or feverish. In the former state, one is not able to keep a grip on the forces, and in the latter, a low form of psychism opens unpleasantly easy, and the result is delirium. The question of diet is an extremely vexed one in occult circles, and I have dealt with the subject at some length in my book Sane Occultism, and will not, therefore, repeat the discussion on these pages. The ethical and humanitarian aspects do not come within the scope of the present discussion. They are a matter of opinion and conscience, and I cannot enter upon them here. From the point of view of practical occultism, the first requisite is a sane mind in a sound body. Whatever diet produces that result is a satisfactory diet. It will always be found, however, that the presence of food in the stomach, even in small quantities, renders work upon the subtle planes more difficult or even impossible. Therefore, it's advisable to have no food of any sort for at least 2 hours before undertaking any practical work. The Eastern tradition, and those organizations that derive from it, include a strict vegetarianism, both on psychic and humanitarian grounds. The Western tradition does not. The effect of a vegetarian diet is greatly to increase the sensitivity of the nervous system and thereby render easier the perception of subtle forces. The drawback to the use of this sensitizing method in the West is that the resulting sensitivity unfits for the rush and drive of urban life, and unless seclusion can be secured, the subject is very apt to become neurasthenic and to suffer from neuritis, neuralgia, sciatica, nervous dyspepsia, and similar complaints. The initiate of the Western tradition overcomes his comparative lack of sensitivity and also the density of the atmosphere in which he has to work by concentrating the forces by means of ceremonial. It's exceedingly difficult to obtain definite results in Europe without the use of ritual. One thing is certain, however. The person who means to employ the concentrating rituals of the Western tradition must not at the same time follow the sensitizing regime of the Eastern discipline. Each is effective in its own way and sphere, but it's fatal to mix them. The sensitized person will be completely bowled over by the forces generated in a ceremonial working. Great importance is attached to the asana, or meditation posture in the East, but the attitudes therein inculcated are practically impossible for the Westerner. Posture is, nevertheless, not without importance. The principle to bear in mind is that the physical body is literally an electric battery, and that during meditation it must be a closed circuit. Any position in which the body is symmetrically disposed in poised balance will be satisfactory so long as the spine is straight, the feet together, and the hands either joined or touching some other part of the body. To cross the legs is bad because it's unsymmetrical. For the same reason, lying upon one side or curled up is also unsatisfactory. Either flat on the back on a bed or couch, or sitting very upright in a straight-backed armchair is best. The position should always be that, if meditation should deepen into trance, there will be no risk of a fall. No one wishes to return from an astral journey to find a front tooth has been knocked out. Moreover, the sense of insecurity as the body passes into trance will be quite enough to rouse consciousness and prevent the trance from deepening. The two best positions for meditation are either flat on the back with a low pillow, legs straight and heels together, and hands slightly folded over the solar plexus or crossed on the breast, in fact, the position in which the dead are laid out, or sitting bolt upright, heels and knees together, and hands laid along thighs, in the position in which the gods of the Egyptians are sculptured. With a little practice, it'll be found possible to maintain a stable equilibrium almost indefinitely in this position. These are the asana postures of the West. Some of the well-known postures of the East have a phallic reference and are best avoided. The law of the rhythmic breath is very important and very potent, but it cannot safely be practiced save under the personal guidance of an experienced instructor, so we will not enter upon it here. It has to do with the direction of magnetic currents in the etheric double and their concentration on the different chakras. If done ignorantly, it will throw the endoctrin system out of gear. The observation of times and seasons in occult work is, or should be, far from a vain observance. There are certain very definite tides in the unseen, and according to the direction in which we are going, these will be either for us or against us. There are also times when the invisible intelligences, which are the vehicles of the cosmic forces, change guard, and the conditions which have been established during the previous tide are no longer operative and have to be renewed. The hours of the day, the phases of the moon, and the seasons of the year are all of great importance in practical occult work, and so are the rising and setting of the planets and their passing over the meridian. All this is part of the technique of occultists, and an inadequate knowledge thereof is of the commonest causes of failure in an occult experiment. So long as we are working on the physical plane, we're obliged to submit to the conditions of that plane, and these phases we have referred to are really etheric tides, the ebb and flow and set of the magnetic currents in the aura of the earth. These are constantly changing, for they represent the sum total of several different sets of factors, all with cycles of different lengths, and moreover the various types of occult operations are differently affected by them. An operation under Saturn will respond differently to the waxing or waning of the moon from one under Jupiter. The deeper one goes into practical occultism, the more delicate the operations become, and the more influence these subtle factors exert. Places also exercise an important influence in occult operations. Some spots upon the Earth's surface are naturally highly magnetic. These have usually been discovered of old time by the ancients, and their possibilities developed, and according to the type of development employed will be their influence at the present day. There's a very great difference between a place which has been used for initiations and one which has been used for evocatory rites involving blood sacrifice. Occultists having the necessary knowledge avail themselves, as far as they can, of places with magnetism already developed. But failing this, they magnetize a place for themselves, but it takes considerable time and work to do this. The astral atmosphere has, as it were, to be brought under cultivation. The single performance of a ritual, even a consecrating ritual, is insufficient for this, and occult work has to go on steadily for months before the atmosphere really gets warmed up. It's extremely undesirable to allow such a spot to be used for other purposes. The magnetism becomes disturbed and broken up, and a fresh start has to be made all over again. Color also is of importance in occult work. For one thing, it has considerable influence upon the state of consciousness, and for another, it acts largely as a means of bringing a force from the etheric to the physical plane. There's no such thing as a best color for this purpose. Different colors are used according to the different forces that are being operated. Each person, according to his ray type, will find one or another color best for his purposes of his private meditation, and should make use of that color in the decoration of a sanctuary or shrine. For the pursuit of deep occult work, it's absolutely essential to have a room set apart for the purpose into which no one except the operator and his assistants is ever allowed to enter. There are two analogies which are very valuable guides in the study of principles underlying magic operations, and these are bacteriology and electricity. The principles of insulation and magnetism, infection and inoculation, are as applicable on the subtle planes as on the dense. Chapter 15. Initiation and Celibacy. A question upon which there is much difference of opinion in occult circles is that of celibacy. Some schools teach that it's essential to the higher occult work, and some do not. To explain the matter fully would only be suitable to those pledged by their initiation vows, for it concerns the deepest and most carefully guarded aspects of occultism. I said a good deal in my book, The Esoteric Philosophy of Love and Marriage, and have also dealt with certain supplementary aspects in the problem of purity. The latter book was written solely from the point of view of the psychologist and social worker, but it's based upon the esoteric teachings of the subject, and those who have sufficient esoteric knowledge to read between the lines can learn a great deal. In these pages, I can only discuss the immediate practical import of this question from the point of view of the seeker after initiation. What is to be his attitude in this matter? The final court of appeal must always be to practical experience, and this tells us that neither a sex life which is under tension from repression, nor one which is fed full to repletion, affords a satisfactory condition for the practical occultism. In the one case, the nervous system tension will betray the operator on the astral, and in the other, there will be a lack of etheric force essential for any occult operation. The problem is not a simple one to solve among the many inhibitions and conflicting interests of modern life, where it's more often a case of what one can do than of what one would do. The ideal is undoubtedly a mating in which husband and wife cooperate in the great work and bring to their mutual relationship an understanding of its occult significance. All authorities agree, however, in advising continence for a period varying from 3 days to a month before any important occult operation. The occult position of those who decide to defy public opinion and take the divorce laws into their own hands is very unsatisfactory. They have roused the antagonism of the group mind of their race, and in anything they may attempt, it will be against them, and they will find themselves opposed by all manner of obstacles. The question of distinguishing between morality and conventional respectability is a difficult one at best, and it's not easy to judge righteous judgment. But anyone who's coming within measurable distance of the divorce court should, out of fairness to his brethren, take no part in group work until he has drawn clear of that purgatorial experience. For all occultism of the Western tradition depends largely upon the group mind of the race for its function. And if those engaged in its operations are at variance with the group mind, their presence will prove disruptive and things will go wrong. All mystery schools in all ages, except those given over to the phallic rites and black magic where such things have use, unite in refusing admission to the hermaphrodite and the eunuch, or anyone who is in any way sexually abnormal, whether by reason of homosexuality or frigidity. The question of virginity is also curious and complex in occultism. The old books have much to say on the subject, the first requirement for many occult operations being a pure virgin or boy below the age of puberty. Occultly understood, only those are virgin of either sex who have not known desire. But although the virgin soul is best suited for any operation involving passive psychism, such as an oracle or watcher of the sacred mirror, only the soul which has come to its full stature and known all sacraments of nature will ever take the supreme degrees. One final word of caution is necessary. It's undesirable that a pregnant woman should take part in any occult ceremonial after quickening has taken place, because the unborn child is a very ready channel of evocation, and the manifestation of any force invoked by the ceremony may take place through him. Algernon Blackwood gives an account of such a happening in his exceedingly valuable book, Julius Le Vallon, and works out its result in the sequel, The Bright Messenger, and I myself have personally known several similar cases. In some cases there seems to be definitely a changeling, a fairy child, brought into the world, and in others the original child is born with a very peculiar and highly sensitized nervous constitution. I cannot repeat too often that occultism is very far from being foolproof, and many experimenters depend for their safety solely upon their inefficiency. Chapter 16. The Western Esoteric Systems. The Western esoteric systems spring from three main roots: the Kabbalistic, the Egyptian, and the Greek, and all medieval and modern derivatives can be traced to one or another of these. To give a detailed account of any one of them is work for a specialist who's been given a lifetime to the study. So in these pages, we can only indicate the broad outlines and underlying principles, but at least it's hoped that enough may be given to throw some light upon an obscure and much misunderstood aspect of the path. Each of these three great systems was developed in response to the needs of a special phase of human evolution, and each one has brought certain aspects of occult science to a high pitch of perfection while correspondingly and inevitably neglecting others. The Greek system is characterized by a pantheon which incarnates natural forces. It's primarily a philosophical system. The Egyptian is characterized by animal-headed gods which represent these forces brought through into human consciousness, and is primarily an initiatory system. The Kabbalistic is characteristic by having no gods at all, but strictly monotheistic, and is essentially a magical system wherein the magus takes the place of the god. In the intercommunication of peoples, these systems have mutually influenced each other and had innumerable special developments in different places. The modern stream of Western esotericism not only contains a blend of all of them, but also much that has been derived from Eastern sources through the mediation of the Theosophical Society. Some of the Eastern terms, such as karma, the chakras, manus, etc., have practically replaced the Western terms. No body of knowledge can be kept in a watertight compartment. There must be inevitably an interchange of ideas wherever there is an association of peoples. Analytical psychology and New Thought have been laid under contribution, and the result is a kaleidoscopic philosophy which requires much sorting before it reveals any coherent pattern. In practical occultism, it's always necessary to go back to the original root stalks, because here alone can we strike the trails that lead into the unseen, the pilgrim ways that have been trodden by innumerable feet. By the meditation and ritual of centuries, an organized aura of thought forms has been built up around these ancient systems, and it's this prepared mental atmosphere that is of such value to the occultist. I do not say that it's impossible to pass on to the inner planes save by one or another of these traditional corridors, but the difficulties of such an undertaking are very great. An occult school is not built in a day, any more than a great public school is built in a day. Tradition and a highly organized group mind play a vital part in both. Moreover, there are certain planes of manifestation which were worked by the mystery schools of previous epochs which are not readily accessible today. Evolution has moved on, and we contact the unseen at different levels. It's very necessary in any work of practical occultism that we have access to the full range of the planes, because every operation is composite and has its relations to the planes above and below that upon which it takes place. The occultist finds it essential, therefore, to avail himself of the corridors constructed by his predecessors, to whom the elemental planes were open. He will therefore always make use of one or another of the ancient systems according to the task that he has in hand. Some are best suited for one contact and some for another. It's not advisable to mix the symbols in an operation, because the same forces function differently on different contacts, but it's very necessary for the initiate to have access to the different stages of development and different levels of contact. There are many methods of consciousness which are entirely modern in their origin and method, and which do not claim to be anything else. These are seen most conspicuously in the many different schools of thought which form the composite New Thought movement. Like all else that deals with the manipulation of the mind, these make use of the principles that have always governed the process of raising consciousness, whether practiced in the mysteries of Ulysses, the Egyptian temples, the consulting room of the hypnotist, the office of the Christian Science practitioner, or the lodge of the initiation of some fraternity. Where the system employed has no contact with the root traditions, it will be found that the results obtained are purely subjective. It's only when one of the ancient systems is used that contacts are made with the nature forces, the elemental and angelic kingdoms, and the earth soul, because as has been already noted, these contacts are inaccessible to the operations of the conscious mind of the civilized white races. They belong to an earlier epoch of development. It may be asked why it is a civilized man should wish to contact these levels of existence if they belong to an inferior stage of development. The first answer to that question lies in the esoteric principle that nothing God has created is unclean, all issuing from the same source. There is difference of function, but no inferiority. Moreover, everything in a more highly developed stage of evolution has passed through the more primitive stages, and these form the foundations of all subsequent developments, and the part that they play in our economy, physical, mental, and psychic, can be readily demonstrated by the person who knows what to look for, as psychoanalysis has shown us. Unless we understand the nature of the basic principles of our existence, we can never hope to raise the lofty superstructure of the trained and initiated consciousness. These archaic levels of manifestation are exceedingly important to the occultist, because it's here that he finds the reservoir of elemental forces whence he derives his power. As the psychoanalysts have clearly demonstrated, here are the springs of man's life. Here is the foundation head of genius and all forms of vital energy, mental and spiritual as well as instinctive. The psychoanalyst seeks to tap these reservoirs in order to free his patient from inhibitions. The occultist seeks to tap them in order to increase his psychic powers. In one case, the abnormal is being made normal, and in the other, the normal is being made supernormal. There is unquestionably an unbroken tradition of initiation in Europe, which has been handed down from adept to neophyte right from the ancient mysteries. To demonstrate proof of this fact to outsiders is not easy. Documentary evidence, by the nature of the work, is carefully guarded secrets, and the severe persecution to which it has been subjected, being very scanty, and even what little we have is much mutilated and often doubtful authenticity. But whoever has seen initiated adepts at work cannot doubt that he's in touch with something very potent, and something, moreover, which can be transmitted to another. It's this subjective experience, although it cannot be offered as proof, which forms the most valid evidence of the reality of that which is sought in the mysteries. To pick up the contacts of one of these great initiatory systems of the past is like touching an electric battery. They're charged full of psychic force, and like Leyden jars, give out sparks when touched. Any school of occultism which is not contacted onto one of these traditional sources of energy is like an electrical installation which is not connected up with the powerhouse. However much switches are turned and levers pulled, nothing happens. Many folk, because they've never been present when power is actually in manifestation, are content to take the alteration in the position of the switches as being the great work. But if they'd never seen the sudden flashing of the light as the current comes through the wires, they would know what it is to expect of occultism and be satisfied with nothing less. The state of personality charged full of power and an exceedingly potent form of vitality is the evidence of the reality of initiation. To what ends this power is turned is a matter which rests entirely in the hands of its possessor. But unless it be rightly handed and kept in the cosmic circuit, it's a thing which will return to the destruction of the vehicle of its manifestation. Received from the cosmic powerhouse, it must travel in the appointed circuit. Otherwise, there's a short. If we elect deliberately to put ourselves in the track of these cosmic currents and invoke them to use us as their channels, we must be prepared to become ourselves links in this circuit from spirit to matter and back again. Herein lies the critical point in the work of the adept. Is he in circuit or earthing? This is the distinction between the right and the left-hand paths.